All right, welcome everybody. Come on in the Zoom room for California Budget, What's in it for Arts, Culture, and Live Events. So excited to do this presentation today with our wonderful colleagues from California Association of Museums, Neva California, and our incredible lobbyists who helped us to get to where we are today. What we'll be sharing in terms of the historic investments made for arts, culture, and live events here in the state of California. This is all pretty much breaking news. Some of these budgets were only signed yesterday, and so by the governor. So you're getting it first here. And we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. There's about 500 people have signed up, so I just want to give you guys a chance to come in the room. I'll introduce myself. I'm Julie Baker. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm coming from the land of the Nevada City Rancheria and Nisenan. I'm about an hour outside of Sacramento. I am the executive director of Californians for the Arts, which is the nonprofit arts organization that builds awareness of the impact of arts, culture, and the creative industries and live events industries here in California. And the executive director of California Arts Advocates, which is a lobbying organization that works to influence both funding and legislation to support our sector. So welcome everyone as we come into the room. We're just going to give it just another minute before we get started. Shortly we'll also have a chance to meet all the other panelists. We're going to start off with an overview of where we are today, how we got to where we are today as well. And then we'll go into each specific budget item, and members of what we call the sort of creative arts coalition here will talk about their specific pieces that they really focused on as we were doing our lobbying. And yes, we invite you in the chat, please, to say hi, introduce yourself, introduce the land that you're coming from if you know that, and also if you want to also add your pronouns, we appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started so that we can keep on time. And again, so you're here for the California Budget, What's in it for Arts, Culture, and Live Events, presented by Californians for the Arts. So we're going to start off with the big picture, and I want to introduce our lobbyists from Shaw, Yoder, Schmelzer, Antwi, and Lang. I got it, I think. Jason Schmelzer, that's just a tongue twister, Jason. And Jason, you've been working with California Arts Advocates for many, many years now, when the California Arts Council's budget was around $1 million. And so our organization specifically is really focused on increasing funding for the state arts agency, which is the California Arts Council. But tell us what was different this year in terms of the other years as someone who's worked on the budget, and just kind of give advocates a big picture of what was different this year.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, this year it was kind of unique circumstances. There was a moment in time. I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that. First and foremost, I think I want to acknowledge our legislative allies. We had a team of legislators that were so committed to the cause this year and worked tirelessly to make sure that we were successful and that our efforts were channeled effectively in the legislature. So I think that was a huge aspect this year. But in terms of what's maybe different than other budget years, the pandemic obviously was a huge factor. The economic impact from the pandemic was a huge factor. I think, the COVID impacts, whether, disease related, health related, or kind of response related in terms of the government shutting certain things down, it kind of established a clear need for state investment in a lot of different areas, let alone the arts. I'll touch on that briefly here in a second. But what it did politically is it kind of created this alignment of purpose in the legislature that's often lacking, right? We exist in a kind of partisan world, even in very deep blue state California, and there are cross currents politically and with priorities. And I think COVID and the economic impacts of COVID really gave a singular focus to the legislature and the administration, which had been missing previously. So, arts in particular, I think had a very strong case. This kind of first to close, last to open mantra that we use throughout. Music venues, theaters, museums all had to completely close for a year. reopening is and was slow. It was also expensive and it was problematic. So I think the pandemic set us up to a degree to have a very effective argument coming into the budget year. The second thing is the California budget and the finances were extraordinarily strong. This is kind of a case where California was both good and lucky, right? You can have either, but if you have both, you end up in a pretty good situation. So I think they were good to a degree. California in 2020 pressed pause on some corporate tax incentives that are pretty important because every rational human was projecting a huge deficit in this particular budget year. Those weren't restored this year, despite the fact that the budget was flush. California also relies heavily on the rich for tax revenue. There's a lot of background on that. And California being the home of tech and the internet in 2020 turned out to be a relatively good thing in terms of our finances, right? The internet did okay in 2020 and California frankly benefited from that. And then obviously there was multiple rounds of federal funding that went to various levels of government, state, local, et cetera. And then the other factor I would add is that the advocates were ready to pivot. You know, you mentioned that we've been doing this for a while, that we started back when the only thing that the state of California was doing was a $1 million match to get some NEA funds for the Arts Council. You know, we've been on kind of this slow, steady climb from that time. And I think what happened early in this year, Julie in particular, and then, you know, the other folks on the phone, I remember the conversation where Julie looked at me and said, so it's time to pivot, right? Like our normal mode of slow, sustainable, steady increases, kind of being respectful of the budget politics and trying to find a way to fit in the long term. You know, we just kind of threw it out and aimed big, and we ended up going for $1 billion, which 12 months ago would have sounded insane. So I think those three factors really, you know, good budget situation for us, the pandemic, and then just having an advocacy base that was willing and ready to pivot and frankly work really aggressively over the summer months to get us where we are today. I think those were the major differences.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jason. I just wanted to give folks a big picture, and I'm going to go through a little bit of a slideshow here to give you an idea of how we got here. And I will mention some of the specific legislative champions in this, so you'll know who they are and you can thank them. But I do, before we get started, also want to acknowledge that this has been an incredibly challenging year for our sector, and we know that. We've done our best to try to support you both in legislation and in funding and resources and policy translation and doing these types of advocacy and education webinars, but we also know that it's not over. You know, that the struggles continue. COVID is still with us. Reopening is slow. We're trying to figure out how to staff up. We're trying to figure out if people can be in offices together or not. And so we want to acknowledge that we're still in the midst of a lot of this, and we want to hear from you in terms of how we can best support also going forward. But let's take a moment, at least today, to celebrate what we have accomplished and what you can access. So let's go ahead and move forward on the slide. If we could, Jade, Alicia, move forward on the slide, that would be great. Hoping we're moving forward. All right, thanks. So quickly, here's the budget overview. For those who want to get into specifics, the SB AB 128 was signed by the governor on June 28th. That's a $262 billion spending bill. There have been some what they call budget bill juniors, SB AB 129, which amends 128, which has a lot of specificity that's related to arts and culture. It was actually just signed yesterday. And then some budget trailer bills, which again, specifically outline what is in for some of the programs, the California Nonprofit Performing Arts Grant Program, the Nonprofit Cultural Institutions and California Live Events Grants Program was also just signed yesterday. And then I also wanted to make a quick mention, and I'll talk about this later too in more detail, about Clean California, because it does have some possible funding for artists. And that's, I think, $1 billion over the next several years. I'll talk about that more later. So next slide, please. So here's some key takeaways. You've seen maybe our announcements. It's over $600 million in investments in arts, culture, and live events. There is the California Nonprofit Performing Arts Grants Program, which is $50 million to California Office of Small Business Advocate for grants to help with workforce development. There's grants up to $75,000 based on budget side. And again, all of this will go into more detail in a minute. California Venues Grants Program, $150 million to Cal OSBA for live events, venues, and businesses, including nonprofits and minor league sports, up to $250,000. The Museum Grant Program, $50 million to the Natural Resources Agency. That is a program that has been around, it just hasn't been funded. So this year it's being funded to the tune of $50 million, and Celeste and Jennifer will be talking more about that. So next slide. $128 million to our state agency, the California Arts Council, with $40 million specifically for creative youth development, $60 million for the California Creative Core Pilot Program, and the remaining about $28 million for local assistance programs. And I believe it includes 2 new staffing positions. There were also a tremendous amount of what we call earmark investments in local communities. There were 81 that we counted in the budget specifically for arts and culture. $4 million to self-help graphics and art, $6.5 million to Destination Crenshaw, and the list goes on, totaling almost $238 million. And these are specific to districts, and we'll talk a little bit about earmarks as we go forward. And then finally, something that we fought for earlier in the year, which is with California Association Museums and Cal Nonprofits and other organizations, the California Relief Grant Program was expanded, and they're reopening the remaining funds for cultural institutions, about $16 million. And there's new funds for micro businesses, which also I think is important to the arts, because there are many emerging artists and arts organizations that are under 50,000 that are not yet C3s that could maybe apply for the micro business grant. So I want to make you aware of those. Next slide. So I just want to take a step back for a second, because this doesn't happen without advocacy. And as advocacy organizations, we really want to highlight how critically important it is to have advocacy organizations working on your behalf and with you, because we couldn't do it without you. But for the very first time, and this was new this year, we aligned nonprofit cultural institutions, for-profit small businesses, and the creative workforce to lobby for this $1 billion for arts recovery and stimulus investment. That's what we put forward. That's what we all decided to focus on together. Next slide. So what was our strategy going into this? So there was 3 organizations of whom you will meet today: the California Arts Advocates, California Association Museums, and Neva California, all coming together. We worked together. We had many, many strategy sessions, many meetings. In fact, we all just saw each other for the first time in a little bit and said, oh, wow, we used to see each other on pretty much daily. How's everyone doing? We first, as Jason mentioned, we had to get our legislative champions. These are people within the legislature who would really push this forward for us, because we're on the outside, right? They're on the inside. We need the people on the inside making this happen. So we are really grateful. And if you are in their districts or not, and you're on Twitter, please thank Assembly members Laura Friedman, Adrien Nazarian, Sharon Quirk-Silver, and Senators Ben Allen, and Susan Rubio for their leadership on this issue. Also have to always mention, of course, Senator Nancy Skinner from Oakland, who chairs the Budget Committee, Phil Ting, who chairs the Assembly Budget Committee, and our champions Anthony Rendon and Tony Atkins, the pro tem and the speaker, always have been amazing arts champions. And then finally, the governor. The governor has been proactive in putting in arts funding every year since he's been governor of California. So we're grateful to the governor and the administration for really highlighting and prioritizing our sector. But this doesn't happen without us pushing and making that it clear that it should be a priority as well. So what did you do? Over 500 organizations, businesses, and trade associations signed on to what we call a NASCAR letter. That's the logo letters, like if you're wearing a NASCAR suit. So that's the insider language that goes on inside what they call the building. Over 4,300 letters were sent to the governor. Every senator received one, and all but 3 assembly districts in California advocating for these historic investments. 86% of those letters were new advocates. So thank you for joining with us. When we met with the governor's office, they said, we hear you. We know about the $1 billion. We know. So we made some noise, and that was really critical in order for us to push past just like having your champions, but then making sure that it actually gets into the final budget. Next slide. All right, so we also were really grateful that many mayors of leading cities signed on to our budget ask of $1 billion. And just like any negotiations, you always start high, right? If we had gotten $1 billion, probably if you add up every little thing in the budget, we may actually have $1 billion. I'm not so sure. I haven't had a chance to really look the granular level of how many universities got funding for arts projects and things, but Mayor Garcetti from Los Angeles, Libby Schaaf from Oakland, London Breed from San Francisco, mayors of Stockton, I'm forgetting it, jump in others, signed on to, and that was really important because it showed that these folks recognize again how much it was important to invest in our sector and the recovery of our sector, and that we were disproportionately impacted by COVID. Trade associations representing businesses that benefit, such as Cal Travel, signed on. Again, big focus on tourism and reigniting tourism. Arts are critically connected to tourism, and we made that argument, and they signed on with us, and we're really grateful. All of us work to get publicity and social media to amplify the need. Great articles in Billboard, LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Twitter, and that sort of thing. Again, building awareness, never stopping, and making sure that it was clear that the need was there, and we know the funding was there. It just needed to be a priority in the budget. And we did a lot of meetings, a lot of hearings, a lot of testifying, a lot of letters. I can't believe how many letters we sent. And then we did it on repeat and repeat and repeat. So that's what you have to do. It's endless, and you have to do it all the time. It can't just be you show up one and done. This is not a one and done business. This is a consistent business. And the reason I'm going over this is because I hope that this also inspires all of you to recognize that advocacy works and to engage in this, because this is how we continue. We are not done. This is not a one time, this is a movement. We're in this for the long haul here. Okay, next slide. And so just quickly, the work continues. We, California Arts Advocates, are sponsoring a bill, the California Creative Workforce Act, with Senator Ben Allen. We're working on, we support SB 805 from Senator Susan Rubio, which is an innovative solution to create a paymaster system and grants for small nonprofits performing arts organizations, and they're specifically for payroll. A California Association of Museums will talk about the CCHE Climate Change Education and Mitigation, California Cultural Heritage Endowment, right? Did I get that right? Advocacy to ensure the new grants programs deliver. Any of you have applied for an SBOG grant at the federal level, you probably recognize how many people have been working behind the scenes to make sure that Treasury actually gets these out and that the guidelines make sense. We continue to do that. We're still working on things with inside. Now that those funding is done, we're not done, okay? So we have to continue to advocate to make sure that these programs actually make sense when they're delivered to you. And we're not done in terms of funding. We didn't get everything we need. There's still other things that need to be funded, and we're going to continue to fight for that. So that's what's going on here. Next slide. And that's my bit, and then we'll get to meeting everybody. So here, how can you engage? And this is really critical. You know, we can't do this without you. There are 6 of us on this call today. This is our job, not Casey's actually. Casey also runs the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, but this is my job. And so, you know, we need you to join us, support us, follow us on all our social media, share our social media posts, tag your legislators. This makes a difference, and this will be included. And yes, you'll have access to all these slides. All right, so that's my quick introduction to how we got to where we are today. And now we're here with everyone, and I want to introduce this amazing team that got us here today to the $600 million. So I'm going to start off with Celeste DeWald. Celeste, if you would introduce yourself and then maybe throw it to your partner in crime, Jennifer, and then Jennifer, you can throw it to the rest. Go ahead.
I would be happy to. Thank you, Julie, for bringing us all together and for that wonderful overview of how we got to where we are right now. My name is Celeste DeWald. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Museums. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm joining you from the tribal land of the Ama Mutsun Ohlone. My partner in our advocacy team, in addition to a very robust and supportive government relations committee that helps guide all of our policy decisions. But in the kind of the person doing the work, calling on our elected officials, participating in the hearings, sending those letters, in addition to myself, is Jennifer Fearing from Fearless Advocacy. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Celeste, and good morning, everyone. Jennifer Fearing, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm coming to you from Sacramento, just across the street from the Capitol, which is on Nishanan land. And I am enthusiastic, and I want to just echo Julie, fantastic lead in. And we're excited here at the California Association of Museums to talk just a little bit about the pursuits that we made as part of this $1 billion coalition and the work that remains ahead as well. We, as Julie said, we are not done yet. Celeste, did you want to give that overview?
That will come later. We're doing introductions right now.
Oh,
so
apologies.
Great.
Okay, then I'm just going to pass it on to Alex and Casey, our friends at Neva California.
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Julie, for hosting this and getting everyone together. It's been amazing working with you all over the last several months. My name is Casey Loudermilk. I am working with Another Planet Entertainment, a Berkeley-based production company and promotions company. I am the assistant general manager of Bill Graham Civic Auditorium in downtown San Francisco. And throughout the pandemic, I was a precinct captain for the National Independent Venue Association. Turned into co-founder for San Francisco Venue Coalition, and then also the California chapter of Neva as well. So happy to be here. And we have been working very closely with Alex Torres and his team at Strategies 360. So tossing it to him.
Hi, everyone. Alex Torres, Director of Government Relations here at Strategies 360. As Casey said, I have the pleasure of working with my colleagues and representing the National Independent Venue Association of California. Can't echo enough the praise for Julie's introduction. This was a unique opportunity, and I think specifically for venues, the old saying goes in Sacramento, if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu, and venues quickly realized when the pandemic hit the need to be at the table, both at the federal level and eventually here in California. And so it's been an adventure to work with Neva and sort of build the plane as we've been flying it, but it's been great to also work with all these other arts advocates to come together for the health of our sector. So great to be with you all.
Thanks, you guys. Such a wonderful team, really committed to the cause, as it were. And but we're not a cause. We are a really critical industry to California. And I think that was one of the big things that we really wanted to make clear in this last particular budget session, is that we are here and we're strong and we're organized. And we need support at this time to recover for the health and benefit of all Californians. Specifically, though, let's get into some of what's in the budget for arts, culture, and live events. And let's start with live events. So Casey and Alex, give us an overview of what is in the California Live Events Grants Program. And I just want to also just step back for 1 sec for everyone who's listening. All of this just got signed. So it is not yet available. It is not yet, you can't apply yet. Today is to really give you an idea of what to expect and where to look for resources so that you're ready to apply when these become available. But you guys really fought hard for this $150 million. We were there to support you along the way. Tell us what you got for live events.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Julie. So I'm going to just give us kind of a quick rundown of how we got here. The general requirements as we understand them of our program, and kind of, future of Neva California. And Alex will be kind of filling in as we go along. So, we obviously were inspired by the national organization, National Independent Venue Association, that was born of COVID-19. We have never had a group of independent venues and promoters getting together to advocate or have a common voice before until the pandemic. So from that national organization, we created a bunch of regional coalitions from Sacramento, San Francisco, Los Angeles, East Bay, San Diego, North Bay, Monterey Bay. So we made all these different regional coalitions. And then just in November 2020, we got kind of the leaders of all those regional coalitions together for our first unofficial Neva California call. And so, our kind of, purpose here was that it's going to take a patchwork of relief at all levels of government for independent venues and promoters to survive this pandemic. We need everyone to chip in. So we did a deep dive analysis of independent venues and promoters in California. We identified approximately 660 independent venues in California that contribute nearly $750 million in total economic impact to the state. The one statistic that got the most runway for us was that for every $1 spent at a venue, $12 is generated in the local economy at bars, restaurants, hotels, lodging, transportation, and retail. So kind of our idea based on this analysis is that the federal Shutter Venue Operators Grant Program would be grants of up to 45% of 2019 revenue. And this would address the accrued debt that all these venues had from being shut down during the pandemic. So we wanted the state program to have 20% of 2019 revenue and help us move forward, help us rehire, help us kind of address venue reopening with COVID guidelines in mind. So our initial ask was a $250 million grant program for venues. That $150 million passed, super grateful. And so that is 20% of 2019 capped at $250,000 per entity. Alex, do you have any kind of other input on kind of how we got here?
So I would say that analysis of the needs of the member venues and exactly the whole universe of the both venues and independent promoters was really critical. In a year, and I think Jason did a great job of outlining some of the budget challenges, initially at least, with so many different competing priorities for members. How do we cut through that? How do we cut through all the different needs from all these different sectors that are reeling from COVID? What it really came down to is that ability to look at our membership and point to illustrations of the challenges venues face. And one example, and Casey's heard this story far too many times, I'm here in Sacramento, California, and Harlow's on J Street. I saw Julia Heath from Harlow's was able to join today. So Harlow's is one of my favorite concert spots, and it is positioned next to 3 restaurants and a bar. And during COVID, if you would drive down J Street, down the street from the Capitol here in Sacramento, it was absolutely blighted. There was nothing there. It was dead. And this was a normally bustling commercial corridor. And it was disappointing to see, but going to members and being able to tell those stories and be able to visualize, help them visualize that really helped elevate this from simply being one of many folks and many groups reaching out to make a case to something that was very tangibly impacting their district and something that appealed to a personal nature, right? And that's something that we found regularly. I would call out Assembly member Wendy Carrillo from Eagle Rock talked about going to see shows at the Silver Lake Lounge when she was in college. Being able to have that the personal touch, the personal experiences from our member venues was really critical, and it wouldn't have been possible without that detailed analysis. So that's what I did. I think that was one thing that was critical. Once members were able to equate that with their own personal experiences, their own lived experiences, it was a lot easier to then go into the economic impact, but it was kind of two-pronged initially.
Yep, absolutely. And so, general requirements, like Julie mentioned, our trailer bill was just signed late Monday night. So this is all very new, and we're, busy working to, engage around the application process. But as we understand things right now, this state venue stimulus grant program, we mirrored the eligibility based off the federal SVOG program with a couple minor tweaks for the state level. This program is focused on for-profit and not-for-profit independent venues and promoters. Unlike the federal program, it does not include talent representatives, movie theaters, or museums, but it does include minor league baseball. These entities must generate 75% of their revenue in California and cannot operate in more than 5 states, and they cannot be a publicly traded company. So those are kind of the general requirements. Again, this application is not open right now. but we are on the way to kind of engaging around that process as well. And obviously hoping that it is a much smoother process than the federal program has been.
I think a key point to emphasize as well, the federal SEOG program was a pretty extensive piece of legislation tucked into an omnibus spending bill. And then you're tasking SBA, the federal SBA, to then interpret this statute and then initiate this program. Here for this program, we want it to be as clean and as simple as we possibly can. This is challenging given that independent venues, independent promoters have never prior to December have never been codified before. They've never been defined in law. And how do you quite define something that's never been defined before? That was a challenge that the federal program has run into, and they continue to work through that. Obviously, preventing fraud continues to be a concern for all grant making or grant tasking entities. But here with California, we wanted to take some of those lessons learned to make it both simple from a Cal-OSBA perspective, as simple as possible, but also something that if you applied for SVOG, it should be a fairly plug and play process with your application. I think that's really critical. We want it to be intuitive to the applicants, something that they have probably on file ready to go, and also easy to issue for Cal-OSBA. As we've all shown, it was great to see, as it's shown, the SVOG program is fantastic. It's been a lifeline for so many venues and promoters, but the implementation is critical, right? Those dollars don't mean anything unless they are helping you rehire, unless they're helping you pay back, that debt accrued during COVID. And so, the goal going forward here is to work hand in hand with Director Gray, the director of the Office of Small Business Advocate, to make sure this is a swift rollout. And then, in addition, what does Neva California look like going from here? And I think, Casey, if you want to touch a little bit about some of the efforts and kind of what we see Neva California going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Number one, we're not going away. I think that we've all understood the importance of having a seat at the table and engaging with our legislators. And we want to maintain that. I see a couple aspects moving forward, primarily around mainly implementation and rollout of this grant program. We want to make that as smooth as possible, make sure we're communicating super clearly with Cal-OSBA as well as member venues of NEVA. And then we also have sponsored Senate Bill 793 out of State Senator Scott Wiener. He is proposing a bill that's going to be addressed next year in 2022 about making a music venue specific liquor license, which has never been done before, and ABC reform is much needed. So we're looking forward to engaging and promoting that, as well as kind of strengthening and raising the voices of independent businesses, venues, and promoters throughout the state. That's what makes California unique. That's what makes tourists want to come to California. And so I think those are kind of the areas I can see us moving forward. Would encourage everyone to visit nevacalifornia.org and follow all of us on our social media handles, engaging with those posts, as well as if you want to join NEVA itself, you can go to nevassoc.org and join as a member venue. And if you're a member of NEVA National, you're going to be a member of NEVA California there.
And I want to add one final point before I toss it off to the next panelist, and that all politics is local, as the old adage goes. What really brought us to where we're at now, not only for NEVA, but also our coalition writ large, is the local engagement. So staying engaged with us. Our local coalitions, we have coalitions in San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, San Diego, Monterey County. The venue community really came together both at the local and the state level. And so going forward, I think that's a lesson that continues to be emphasized and learned as well for all advocacy organizations, but especially the arts community, because when we come together, we do win. Advocacy does work, as Julie said. And so I would encourage the venues, nonprofits, everybody on this call, the importance of engaging locally can't be understated, right? It's you never know if an assembly member or state senator had a great experience at a local show or used to be an actor. Senator Susan Rubio calls out her experiences and how impactful a local theater company was in her development as a person, her growth as an individual. So it all means something, and it's important that we all stay engaged. So with that, I believe Jennifer and Celeste, you guys can be going next.
Let me take it real quick before I hand it back to them. I just want to thank you guys both. And I just want to also just highlight that when Casey started in this, he had never done advocacy or lobbying work. And part of the reason why I want to highlight that is to just tell you that you can all engage. Casey doesn't do this for a living. Casey's doing it because he saw the need and he stepped up. And then he hired some great lobbyists to support them. But I can tell you that, he's done an amazing job, and every one of you on this call can be an advocate and can speak to your representatives and can advocate for the sector and be successful with us. We cannot advocate for you. We need to advocate with you. So I'm going to constantly get back to that because it's so critical for us to continue this momentum. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Celeste and Jennifer. Thanks, Alex and Casey.
Great, thank you very much, Julie, Casey, and Alex. Again, my name is Celeste Wald. I'm Executive Director of the California Association of Museums. We are probably one of the oldest kind of partner in terms of doing advocacy. Our association has been around since 1979, and we were conceived with the idea that museums had an interest in being a voice in Sacramento for their collective needs. Our vision of our association is stronger museums for a stronger California, to recognize that museums are part of the fabric of communities and can help the state with its vested interests and help communities be stronger. And that really is the way in which we try to approach our government relations work. I'm going to give credit to Jennifer for encapsulating sort of our approach to advocacy this past year in 2020 and 2021 in 4 words: response, relief, recovery, and resilience. And I think that's just a beautiful way to describe the approach that we've had. We were there right in the responding to the needs of museums when all of the museums were closing across the state and across the nation. We were there when there were calls for relief at the federal and state level. And we were advocating strongly with our members. We have about 200 institutional members and another 1,000 individual and business members. And so many of our members came out and helped us with our advocacy work, both for relief, response, and now recovery. So I want to thank all of those institutions that answered those calls to action to sign this letter, sign this other letter, and pick up the phone and make a phone call. Now we're at a point where after this budget, we are focusing more on recovery and resilience. Our effort and our partnership in this $1 billion campaign was really very much looking at the recovery of the museum field of having been closed for over a year. And what does that look like? How can the state help advance its own interests, as well as help our institutions, our museums, recover from the great reductions in resources and in reductions in their ability to serve their communities. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like moving forward, that what Julie mentioned previously about the climate change education and mitigation funding that we're still seeking. So Jadalissa, could you bring up my couple slides? I only have a couple slides here, more as reference for those of you who are museums or organizations that might benefit from the resources that I'm going to talk about in just a minute, that you know where to turn to. These are really just screenshots of web pages, but at the bottom there are some URLs where you can go for more information. One of the state agencies that our coalition was advocating for is the California Cultural and Historical Endowment, what we call CCHE for short. CCHE, which is housed in the Natural Resources Agency, was established in 2003, specifically to fund cultural and heritage projects that give a more fuller and more equitable picture of California's past. And that really was the lens through which it was funded and developed. The state entity is tasked with preserving and protecting California's cultural resources, as you can see from the website here. The initial funding for CCHE was a statewide bond known as Prop 40 that passed in 2002. And then subsequently, over a 5-year period of time between 2005 and 2010, the CCHE awarded over $122 million to 150 organizations for 180 projects across California. And all of those projects at the time were capital projects because that's what the funding source allowed. So when you have funding from a proposition, it really is focused on just capital projects. CCHE has always prioritized absent or underrepresented stories from California's history. That is baked into the state agency. Over that 5-year period of time with the Prop 40 money, the program was massively oversubscribed. The total value of all applications from 4 rounds of competitive grants submissions came close to $921 million. So there's always been a greater need out there for preserving, interpreting, safeguarding California's cultural resources, and not enough money there to do it with. So, you know, that's really kind of the gap that we were trying to fill. Let me talk a little bit about what these projects, the projects that were funded, look like. As I mentioned, it's all focused on absent or underrepresented stories from California's history. So a lot of the cultural projects that were funded over that 5-year period of time were organizations like Japanese American Museum in San Jose, the Los Coches Adobe in Soledad, the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center in Santa Rosa, the Angel Island Immigration Station in San Francisco, the California Agricultural Workers History Center in Watsonville, the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach. I'm just naming some of these, and these are, like I said, there were 180 projects that were funded. And these are the type of projects that we wanted to continue to support and lift up with this additional funding. So since 2010, however, CCHE has been essentially unfunded. I say essentially because it's not, there is one funding source that our association was very, what has been and is very actively involved in, which is the Snoopy Special Interest License Plate. That funding, though, specifically goes to the museum grant program, and the proceeds are generating about $400,000 a year. So I want to give a real quick shout out to Pro Tem Atkins for being the champion for the Snoopy license plate and for her ongoing support of CCHE. There are also many, many other staff members and legislators that I'd like to shout out to: Mary Kames, Dana Mitchell, Lauren Pizer-Maines, many, many budget staff and administrative staff who have been very supportive of this effort. We have been advocating for CCHE funding because we believe that preserving and protecting California's cultural resources will help Californians better understand the past. It'll promote the state's interest in equity and racial justice. It'll help cultural institutions recover from the pandemic, as I mentioned before, and help generate additional economic activity. Next slide, Jay Lisa. The pot of money that was in the state budget is $50 million specifically for the museum grant program. And we are very excited to see this one-time infusion of $50 million from the state of California for the museum grant program. Like I said, we think it'll really help with the recovery of our field. And after being closed for over a year, many museums are struggling with fewer resources and reserves. The museum grant program is an existing program. It's not a new program. And it funds small capital projects or programs that support and enhance museum services. It just completed its 3rd round of funding earlier this summer and has been consistently oversubscribed. It's only been able to fund about a quarter of the applications that have been submitted each year. In the last round and in this future round with this $50 million, only museums that serve historically underserved communities or Title I students are eligible to apply. And you can get more information at the URL that I have listed here. Next slide, please, Jada. In terms of what our future looks like, we have been advocating for $125 million to the California Cultural and Historical Endowment for projects that protect California's cultural and historic resources from climate impacts or inform the public about resiliency to climate change. We recognize that our institutions are at risk from the changes in our climate, but they also are entities that are foremost educational, that can really be strong partners with the state in educating the public about the changes to our climate and what choices can be made locally and statewide, and what individuals can do to help us mitigate those changes. So with that, I just quickly want to pass it over to Jennifer to see if there's anything you'd like to add, Jennifer, to this overview of what CAM's priorities have been and what we have accomplished.
Sure. Well, thank you, Celeste. And I'll start first with where you ended. The bill that's displayed in this letter here, Senate Bill 45, was aimed at putting a new statewide climate resilience bond before voters, which, because of California's unique budget surplus situation, is not something that's going to advance at this time. However, the governor and legislative leaders are, as we sit here, continuing to negotiate what the details of a climate resilience package with kind of current funds, so not seeking additional debt through a bond, but instead through some of these surplus funds. They are still working out the details. And so this is the real work that's not done for us yet, for the museum sector, as we continue to push for funds that we might have obtained through a bond, instead trying to get and stay on the radar through additional funds to CCHE in this climate package that's being negotiated now. So any of you on the call, we're not going to miss an opportunity to urge you to engage Celeste or me, or just call your own state lawmaker, assembly member, or senator, and urge them to be a voice for museums in pursuit of this funding. Or Celeste, I believe we're starting yet another kind of round of engaged advocacy with legislators and with our members over what is otherwise a summer recess. The work here will continue in terms of negotiation, and we'll need your help. We want to take this opportunity to get more funds into CCHE so that we don't miss the opportunity presented by the surplus that's available. $50 million is a fantastic start through the museum grant program, but we need more in order to be resilient as we move ahead. I wanted to make a couple of other plugs. We didn't mention, but there is another $1.5 billion of relief that's gone into the Cal OSBA small business and nonprofit grant relief program. So for any organization that has either not applied or has struggled, has not been approved for funds through that program, they're committed to another $1.5 billion. And to answer a question that I saw also live, I'll mention that yes, we are continuing to engage directly with Cal OSBA and Lendistry and our legislative partners to ensure that some of the challenges through that process get addressed, so that there's more success with more ease to get access to those $5,000 to $15,000 grants that are available. And then explicitly, also, one of the trailer bills that was just signed by the governor explicitly authorizes that there are $16 million that remain in cultural institution grants through that program. So there had been an earmark of $50 million that would go just for rounds that were for cultural institutions. They will do several more rounds. I'm not sure exactly the number, if it's 1, 2, or 3, but more rounds to try to get those $16 million out to eligible cultural institutions. And again, we want to work to continue identifying what the challenges that institutions have had in getting approved for that funding, and make sure that $60 million is distributed. I'll also just mention and give a plug for as things get operationalized, as these grant programs and others. Wearing another hat, I have the pleasure of representing the nonprofit sector through Cal Nonprofits. And we have been undertaking a painstaking effort over the last couple of weeks to try to find all of the different dollars that are new that nonprofits may be eligible for. And there are billions of dollars in new grant programs that extend beyond what we're talking about today, but for which your organization might be eligible. And a couple years ago, we helped establish a centralized grants portal. So once all state grant programs are established, they will appear in grants.ca.gov. And so we want to encourage folks to bookmark that site, sign up to get notifications from them. They also got a little bit more funding in the budget to help make the grants portal an even more improved process for customers like the nonprofits and for-profits on this call to utilize the state grants portal to access state funding and make that easier for everyone who's eligible. So I will stop there. And I just want to thank this whole collaboration. We came at this with no scarcity mindset, and that was absolutely the right approach. And I hope that this is just the beginning of a lot of collaboration. We want to not just have this be a one-off experience, but a sustained effort at long-term, support for this sector. So thanks for letting me be part of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer and Celeste. And just a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to go quickly through some of the funding that's going to CAC, some other items, California Arts Council, and then we'll go into Q&A. So thanks for that. And then if you could start my slides, Jade Alicia, again. I'll get those going. And thanks to Jade Alicia, who's part of the team here at Californians for the Arts. I want to give a shout out to Matt Carney, who's our interim projects manager as well, who's also the executive director of San Diego Ballet. We were lucky to have him during this time period when the ballet sadly was not as operational. All right, so if we could get that screen up, that would be great. I don't see it there yet, so there we go. Awesome. Okay, so quickly, I'll go through some of these. This is a little bit more specific. This is actually from what is in the trailer bill. This is SB 151, which you can look up. But and again, we'll send you follow-up for everyone who signed up for this, so you can start to look at this information more yourself. But there's $50 million to the Office of Small Business Advocate, which is under GoBiz, for grants specifically to help with workforce development. It's up to $75,000 for an eligible nonprofit performing arts organization with a budget size of $2 million and under. In this category, you do have to be a 501c3, not a fiscally sponsored organization. And you need to be within these codes: theater companies, dinner theaters, dance companies, musical groups and artists, other performing arts companies. Next slide. And then this gives you an idea of how the grants shall be awarded on a first come, first served basis. $25,000 for applicants gross revenue greater than 1,000 to 100,000, 50,000 for applicants with annual gross revenue greater to 100,000 up to $1 million, and then $75,000 for applicants with annual gross revenue greater than $1 million and up to $2 million, all in the 2019 taxable year. They should be used for the following: mostly employee expenses, payroll costs, healthcare benefits, paid sick, medical or family leave, and insurance premiums, contributions or payments to a centralized payroll service. Many arts organizations, smaller budget arts organizations, as they're learning to become into compliance with Assembly Bill 5, which really has changed how employment laws are done here in the state of California in terms of how do you categorize people as employees or independent contractors. Our organization has worked a lot on this particular issue, are needing to now have payroll and have workman's comp and have all these things that they didn't necessarily have before, because maybe you're all volunteer organization or quite small. So we're looking at how do we get a centralized payroll service to both aggregate the cost and also to simplify the process. And so this funding can be used for that. Recruitment, training, development, other human resources related expenses, and other operating expenses or equipment for employees. So this is really very specific funding. We thank Senator Susan Rubio, Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, and others who really fought for this to come into the budget this year, because this is critical for particularly our small budget nonprofit performing arts organizations in order to be able to comply with current labor laws, to be able to pay our workers accordingly, which is what we also want to fight for. So thanks. Next slide. Okay, so the next pot I wanted to talk about is what's going to the California Arts Council. Probably many of you maybe have applied or received funding from the Arts Council already. And there are some very specific things that are in the budget this year. There's $40 million to be used for creative youth development grant programs. It needs to be expended up to by June 30th, 2024. And 1% of the funding may be used to support administrative costs. I want to just clarify what is creative youth development, because it's not arts ed or arts integration. It's its own thing. And I just wanted to briefly touch on that. It's a deep arts learning centered in long-term, multi-generational relationships with artist mentors. It is based in the community rather than schools, primarily happens during after school hours and on weekends, tend to be culturally reflective of the young people involved, and serves them through the age of 24. In addition to arts learning, CYD organizations provide young people with holistic services such as mental health counseling, academic support, college and career readiness, civic engagement, and workforce development. Youth voice, cultural equity, and social justice and collective action are core principles of CYD work. Outcomes are anchored in positive youth development, not just artistic development. And CYD organizations are using the arts as a platform for personal, community, and social change to create a more just society. And I want to thank some of our board members and people in the community of the creative youth development sector for providing this explanation, because I think it's really important for us to understand when it's put in a budget, what is the intention, or at least what is the field recognize as what this means. And so this is where that's coming from. This is not coming from the legislature or from the governor. This actually comes from the field in terms of what is creative youth development. But there is $40 million for that. As you all know, for the California Arts Council, they get to determine how those grant programs are put out into the field, both with their staff and their council that's appointed by both governor and the pro tem and the speaker. Those are your council members. So it's really important to stay engaged also with what the California Arts Council is doing. All their meetings are public. You can make public commentary, and that's where you can learn about when these opportunities are rolling out. Next slide, please. And their next meeting, I believe, is July 20th, which is next week. Up to $60 million shall be used for the California Creative Corps pilot program, which is really exciting, something California Arts Advocates and Californians for the Arts has worked with a number of people in the state on, and Maria Costa on our board from the Latino Center of Arts and Culture in Sacramento worked on an amazing Sacramento Artist Corps, which we lifted up to the governor's office and said, this is an incredible example. There have been others, Deborah Cullinan at YBCA, many others across the state have been really working hard on trying to elevate how can we utilize artists in service to, and in this case, maybe it's first public health messaging, and specifically in local communities using very culturally specific and artistic practice to develop those messages. Again, $60 million needs to be encumbered or expended by June 30th, 2024. And the legislature put this in that it needs to be in every county and prioritize grants and zip codes in the lowest quartile of the California Healthy Places Index. And so they want to make sure that it's getting to the most need, the communities of most need. Next slide. And just quickly again, and this is actually from something that the Department of Finance submitted to the legislature to explain what is the California Creative Corps Workforce Economic Recovery Pilot Program intended to fuel positivity, regain public trust, and inspire safe and healthy behaviors across California's diverse populations through artist-led messaging disseminated via media outreach and engagement campaign. We know artists are our communicators, and so we're grateful for the governor and the legislature recognizing the valuable work that artists can do. This program will provide grants to local, regional, and statewide organizations in all 58 counties to fund unemployed and underemployed artists, create these messages in support of civic engagement and community participation in multiple priority areas, including, next slide, pandemic recovery. So that's specifically public health messaging, supports social and personal well-being as we begin the recovery process, environmental, civic, and social engagement as well, supports water and energy conservation, emergency preparedness, relief and recovery, social justice, and environmental justice. So it's really, and as this is again from the Department of Finance, is submitted and worked with the California Arts Council, this pilot reflects a long-standing value of the CAC, the California Arts Council, of leveraging arts networks that have supported disaster recovery efforts, social crises, and conservation goals. So stay tuned as the CAC rolls out what this program looks like and how you you can engage as either a local arts organization or an artist in this program. We don't have the exact specifics of how it's rolling out yet. Next slide. And then, okay, a little bit more about that. So they'll implement this, training technical assistance for grantees to apply as they normally do. And will provide to local, regional, and statewide arts organizations that will in turn re-grant funds to local arts and social service organizations, BIPOC and LGBTQ+ groups, and individual artists. Focus on the vulnerable communities, and as it's directed in the legislature, the disproportionately impacted communities on the Healthy Places Index, and economic support to artists, ambassadors, and culture workers who will create awareness messages and public engagement. So that's kind of an overview of what this program is. Again, it has not been rolled out yet, but stay, aware of what the CAC is doing. Next slide. I'm trying to go fast so we can get to all your questions. I just want to mention a couple of other things that we saw in this year's budget to get us over that hump of over $600 million, which is really extraordinary. And again, take a moment to breathe and pause and congratulate all of you for the amazing efforts that you all made to make this happen. But this is also what Alex said in terms of the value of local. There were 81 is that we counted arts and culture earmark investments in local communities. And that is, some incredible organizations that have long been in communities doing amazing work are getting these really significant investments. We're really pleased to see that. It's very exciting. But that really goes to also the importance of creating that relationship to your specific legislator and letting them know the work that you're doing and the needs that you have. So when there is these sort of moments that there aren't always in the budget, these sometimes once in a lifetime opportunities for significant funding that's going through the state as it is today with the federal monies as well, that you are poised to maybe to make that ask with your legislators. So again, I don't want to devalue how critical it is for you to do that part in your work. Add in advocacy to your work. Think of your legislators partly as your major donors. They could potentially be one of your major donors, but they're also elected. So they want to hear from you. So it's really critical. As Jennifer mentioned, the California Relief Grant Program is expanding again. There'll be more of that. There's remaining funds for cultural institutions, about $16 million. That is the program that goes through Lendustry. California Association of Museums, Californians for the Arts, our organization, have been community partners providing technical assistance and community outreach about these programs. Will continue to do that as this goes forward. Likely, we were waiting to hear more information about it. We understand that there's advocacy needed to make sure that these programs are as streamlined as possible, that they make sense to our sector, and we're doing everything we can to make that happen. We also need you to lift your voices up and to talk to your own legislators and to let us know so that we can also communicate effectively. And then finally, I did want to mention this has come up a couple of times that people have asked us about, and we've seen this, and maybe you've seen some of the press out there. There's an initiative, it's a $1.1 billion effort to massively expand state and local litter abatement efforts to provide thousands of jobs, including for people exiting homelessness, at-risk youth, veterans, formerly incarcerated individuals, local artists, and students. And I obviously highlighted artists because that's what we're talking about today. And this is a big initiative that the governor put forward and the legislature has supported. Put the next slide up if we could. We don't know yet the specifics of this program yet either. It's going to go through the Department of Transportation. And one of the reasons I want to highlight this is that a lot of times in the arts, we tend to only look to the arts for funding. And I want to make sure that you utilize that you think about SBA, you think about arts organizations as businesses. Sometimes you're large businesses, sometimes you're small businesses, sometimes you're sole proprietorship, sometimes you're a nonprofit, but we're all businesses and we are providing economic value. So yes, you should be looking at the California Arts Council, but also look at what GoBiz is offering, the SBA is offering, and in this case, the Department of Transportation. So this is actually from Governor Newsom's own press release, July 7th, and you can see what he's talking about in this particular Clean California program. And then the last quote is, it's not just about addressing encampments, it's also about leaving something behind, beautifying the landscape, and looking at art components such as murals. And for all those of us who've heard me speak many times before, we talk about arts integration strategies, how critical it is for arts to be seen in other ways, not just art, again, in the silo of the arts funding bucket. So it's really awesome that our governor is seeing arts as part of beautifying and transportation and what that can do. And I think that I know many of you do that in your own local communities, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to access funding here. In his budget originally, there was $75 million. Legislature rejected it. We're still trying to figure out specifically what it looks like. It's likely going to be very local. So keep in touch with your local transportation departments, your county agencies, to see when this is coming down and how you can engage. I think that's my last slide. Yes, good, awesome. Okay, phew. I tried to do it fast so we can get to your questions, because it looks like there's 22 questions in the line here. So I'm going to open that up, and if you have more, please add those here. Some of them have been answered a little bit, but we'll go to the first one, just happens to be the one I see first, which is just a clarification question. This is for Jace Neva. Can a venue receive both the SFOG and the California Venues Grant? If yes, does it decrease the award for either?
I'll field that quickly, and Casey, let me know if I miss anything, but the legislation does not take away anything. It doesn't even factor in, frankly, SVOG. It only factors in the California Small Business Relief Grants. So if you received, any amount of those small business grants ranging from $5,000 to $25,000, that was a part of that initial $3.5 billion investment, which has been restocked. So if you were to apply for another California small business grant and get that, all of the total small business grants you would have received from that would be subtracted from your potential California Venues Grant program. But there is no language around SVOG. It is purely focused on benefits that you receive from the state of California.
Great. Okay. So then there's another question specifically around the California Live Events grants program for museums. I think this has come up a couple of times. So number one, you said museums are actually not in the 150 million. Can we, is that that's confirmed as not eligible for the Live Events grants program? So
the NAIC codes, let me double check that just to make sure I'm giving accurate information here.
Because one of the and just as you're looking that up, one of the things that people are noting is that in SFOG, you had to have fixed seating, which many museums don't. And so that was sort of like why they couldn't access SFOG. And so they're trying to understand, is that also the case here in this grant, or they're just not even in that bucket and go to CCHE funds instead?
So this is definitely something we can seek further clarification on, because I'm not sure that the breadth of the NAIC codes, and I'm not sure if any of them listed in the bill capture museums. Initially, we were looking to emulate the SVOG criteria of having fixed seating, but that language is not in the legislation. So I think it would, to the extent that a museum fit under the NAIC codes, that would be pertinent.
Celeste, or Jennifer, anything to add?
I think there was a perception that the cultural institutions funding was the funding that museums would that were specifically called out, that 50 million. But unfortunately, those grants were very small, and they did not take our recommendation to make those grants larger. So when we were advocating for the increase of those to go from $25 million to $50 million, and for the program that specifically called out museums for funding, we asked for larger grants, and that was not granted at that time. So that is an unfortunate thing. And it is absolutely true that the SVOG, SVOG grants, we polled our members, and a little over half of our members are not eligible because they don't have fixed seating. So that is something that we've been using as a counterpoint to why there's additional funding needed, specifically for CCHE and museums. But it is not specifically relief. It is recovery that we're looking for. So it's a little, I think there probably is a significant gap between what the needs are, the relief needs are, for museums, and what they have received between federal and state sources.
So the work continues, but they should, for all of us in terms of advocacy. And then also museums should certainly be watching, obviously, everything that CAM's doing to get the most up-to-date information, but also CCHE specific, the museum grant program funds, which now has 50 million in it. And that's hopefully just the beginning with the work that you guys are doing. There's a question around specificity around, I think this is again on the live events grant program. They're a large nonprofit organization, Hollywood Bowl, Ford, Walt Disney Concert Hall, et cetera. Are they able to apply? Because I didn't see a max amount.
Yeah, so there wasn't as far as revenue in California. I believe that, yeah, so nonprofits definitely qualify. I'm just reviewing my notes here just to make sure that I don't misstate that. But yeah, I mean, the big three categories fundamentally are sole proprietors, C Corp, S Corp, LLC, 501 registered 501c3, as well as meeting the NAIC codes, which on page 33 of the bill details all the various NAIC codes, or any of the following individual entity that meets both of the following criteria. Principal activity being promoting, producing, managing, hosting live concerts, comedy shows, theatrical productions, etc. Performers are paid 70% of earned revenue of individual entities generated in the state of California. I would point to page 33 specifically. There are no necessarily revenue caps other than being a publicly traded company or doing business in more than 5 states. But yeah, nonprofits, and the other nonprofit string being that for a venue owned or operated by a nonprofit entity that produces free events, the events are produced and managed by paid employees, not by volunteers. So I think all of that's relevant, but from my read of the bill, my understanding, and again, I would emphasize the fact that this is just the implementing language giving broad authority to CalOSBA to implement the program. Fundamentally, what it will come down to as far as the rollout of the program is how CalOSBA looks at these requirements. And as I said, our goal was to make it much more simple than the SVOG. And so the importance of continued advocacy, working with CalOSBA to make sure some of these pay points are more explicitly fleshed out. But read of the statute currently is that larger nonprofits would definitely qualify.
And thanks, Alex. And for those interested, and maybe someone can throw it in the chat, it's SB and AB 151 is the trailer bill that has the specific language right now that details as much as we know about this program. And then as Alex, has stated, and all of us will be doing, is continued work and advocacy, hopefully directly with those agencies that receive the funds to make sure that it really meets the needs of the field and that it comes out as fast and as seamless as possible, because we understand the urgency that you all have in order to be able to restart, recover, and get people back to work and offer these amazing programs. I think we answered this already. If you received a grant under the California Relief Grant Program, can you still apply for the California Live events? You can, it's just going to be deducted. So the amount that you received. Full state of list of state reps and mayors who supported this. I think we answered some of that. We would certainly, if you follow us on Twitter, any of us on Twitter, you'll probably see us all the time thanking those who have been the amazing champions. The 5 lead champions that we had from the Senate and from the Assembly were Assembly members Friedman, Nazarian, Sharon Quirk Silva, and then on the Senate side, Senators Ben Allen and Susan Rubio. But really, we honestly had tremendous support from almost every legislator we met with who understood the need. And as I think someone said here, also personally felt a connection to what we do. And I think what we often all say over and over again is how critical, if you have a healthy arts and culture corridor in your community, you will have the other benefit businesses and the health of the community will benefit. And every legislator understood that intuitively, if not with economic evidence. Okay, will any of the new CAC grant programs be for nonprofits that do arts integration? I would assume so, yes, but I can't say definitively. We need to see what they're going to do in terms of priorities with the remaining dollars, which is about $26 or so million in local assistance. And so I would also say what's really critical, and this is where advocacy comes in, is that you as the field need to be informing the agencies of what it is that you need. Similarly with California Arts Council, show up at their public hearings, give public comment, talk about the work that you're doing and why the funding is necessary for the programs that you're doing. Okay, we talked about that. There's some very specific questions from Joanne, who I know, I think I also sent these off to Alex and Casey. So maybe
we can wrap them off pretty quickly if that's
okay. You want to go ahead? Go for it.
Yeah, sure. So we've answered you know, how the SVOG and CA venues grant interlaps. Venue applying to get request desired. So it is similar to SVOG in that it requires grants to be an amount equal to the lesser of $250,000 or 20% of gross earned revenue for the 2019 taxable year. Their grants to the eligible applicants are prioritized on documented percentage of gross earned revenue declines based on reporting periods comparing California gross earned revenues for Q2, Q3, Q4 of 2020 versus those same quarters of 2019. Itemized list of areas the award funding can go. If you go to page 35 of SB 151, section 9, subsection G, numbers 1 through 6, it lists out everything. So some examples: employee expenses, including payroll costs, healthcare benefits, paid sick, medical or family leave, and insurance premiums. Working capital and overhead, including rent, utility, mortgage principal, interest payments, costs associated with reopening business operations after being fully or partially closed, costs associated with complying with COVID-19 federal, state, or local guidelines for reopening, any other COVID-19 related expenses not already covered through grants, forgivable loans, or other relief through federal, state, county, or city programs. Next question: reporting requirements. That has to do more with GoBiz. They're going to be posting recipients of the grant programs. They're also going to be submitting a report to the fiscal and policy committees of the legislature. Can the venue apply for both PPP2 and CA venues grant? Yes. Are both private and nonprofit venues eligible? Absolutely.
There's always one time when I forget to unmute. Thank you, Alex, for that specificity. And again, you know, we're doing our best. We tried to come out pretty fast with this webinar because we wanted to make sure that you, the field, understood that there's a lot in the budget for our sector. But there's a lot of work still to be done and to be released. So stay tuned. And again, I'll just put a plug to make sure you follow all of us, that you join if you can. I'll be honest with you, all of us are also just small nonprofit arts organizations ourselves with very small staff to do the work that we do. So we hope that you'll recognize the value of having statewide advocacy organizations like California Association of Museums, like Neva California, like AXO, Association California Symphony Orchestras, and like Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates, and that you will consider, once you get one of these grants in particular, to join us because we really directly work on your behalf. So that's my quick plug for that. Which opportunities for those of us use a fiscal sponsor, who use a fiscal sponsor? And that's a great question. And that's something that, you know, I think we're trying to also, and Jennifer, Celeste, I know you might want to jump in here on this as well. I know that, you know, CAC, the California Arts Council, certainly does do funding directly for fiscally sponsored organizations or grant programs that are really designed for emerging arts organizations that typically start off as fiscally sponsored. But we also know that a lot of what comes out tends to reflect those codes that we're talking about, or a 501c3 specific designation. So that is something that we're aware of in our own advocacy and educating legislature and the administration about, because it's very particular, I think, to our sector that this exists, or into the nonprofit world. Celeste, Jennifer, do you have anything to add in terms of opportunities for fiscally sponsored organizations?
I don't believe that CCHE funding covers fiscally sponsored organizations, if that's specifically what you were asking about. I think that tends to be nonprofit organization, established nonprofit organizations. But I'm not sure about the cultural institutions funding.
No, that was not, you couldn't be fiscally sponsored. You had to be, yeah. But I know for sure CAC does. So let's look there. But I think it's an important point in terms of making sure that there is equity in funding, and that all types of organizations that are doing critical work in their communities are receiving public funding, because that is also how we grow those services. So thanks for that question. Okay, are public stations, radio stations, considered performing arts venues? It would have to be determined by your code, like your what they call the NIACS code that Alex was referencing. So I'm not sure what you file in your 990, but I don't know. I think it would have to depend if you have a venue of some sort. It is fixed seated, that sort of thing. Anyone else have
cost for entry as well? If you don't fit into NAIC codes, like I said, if sections or the larger sections A, B, and C on page 33 of 151 detail this in much more specificity. But fundamentally, if you weren't to fit in one of the NAIC codes, you would then go to any of the following, and that being, of course, performers being paid 70% of earned revenue generated through cover charge, ticket sales, production fees, or production reimbursement. So it really would, again, devil's in the details on the implementation, but the way the language reads, it just depends on how you file how your organization is structured currently.
Yeah, and I think the same thing with the nonprofit performing arts grant program, the 50 million. It has very specific codes in there as well. Let's see. Next question. Is there a list of organizations that received a state small business grant, the California Relief Grant? If so, why not? Shouldn't this be public information? Yes, and yes, it should be. I think there's been some release of that, and Lucy Salcido Carter from Cal Nonprofits added in that there's some data on that, and she put the link as well. But I know for sure the legislature's absolutely been asking for that specificity, and they've been releasing it as they have it, and so that's the link for it. With creative youth development, does the program imagine that museums and arts orgs help and implement these mainly? I don't know what the program imagines, honestly, yet. Those are the sorts of things that I don't want to project. I just wanted to put out there what the field says is creative youth development. And that isn't necessarily then that it is in maybe a larger institution. It's often these very, smaller community-based organizations that are doing this incredible work. But I don't know. That's something remains to be seen in terms of what the CAC, the California Arts Council, releases as guidelines for that grant program. But again, your voice in engaging on what that should look like or could look like is really critically important, because they're an agency that is here to serve you. So make sure that you let them know what you think it should be. Where can we sign up for updates on the GoBiz for grants for workforce development? I'd like to know when guidelines will be available, what websites to visit. Great question. I think GoBiz actually has, I believe, a way to sign up on their page. If someone maybe can quickly look for that while we're talking and put it in the chat, that would be great. I know that I get things about from them as well. Certainly also Twitter and places like that, if you're not on there, honestly, is a great place to follow all of these agencies, and they often will announce things that are happening there. And of course, follow all of us, because we'll try and keep you informed to specific things that will filter out what may not be applicable to you, but applicable to our sector. Okay, our audience. Okay, so it's saying, just as a point of reference for advocacy, visitation to children's museums in California exceeded 2.5 million visitors in 2019. Significant impacts on local economies. Our audience is currently unvaccinated. We are looking at 2022 before that is likely. Please prioritize support for us in your advocacy. Yeah, that's definitely something that I know that has been a lot of, we've heard. I'm also on a school board, so we talk about this a lot in terms of what what is the significance of you're serving children and that's your main constituency? How do we deal with the fact that they are unvaccinated, and can we open safely? So I think that that continues to be a conversation in terms of who's continuing to be impacted. So thank you for that. And anyone else on the panel, welcome to join in. I'm just trying to get through these. And we've got about 6 minutes left. Can we reopen the California Relief Grant Program to museums that were not eligible for SFOG funding for a second round of funding? It wouldn't even come close to what SFOG would have covered, but it would help. Certainly something in terms of advocacy that we can certainly bring back. Right now, we've heard that it's, you know, just one time, but we can certainly, right? Jennifer, Celeste, anybody feel like we can certainly lift that up? Who in the government? This is an anonymous attendee. Is this someone in the governor's office? Who in the governor's office said the NASCAR campaign worked so well? Who heard about the 1 billion?
Lots of people.
That's the people.
That's the people.
No, you know, we have a number of people that we all meet with all the time. There are specific people in the governor's office that hold the portfolio for like the Arts Council, for museums, for small businesses, et cetera. So we're all talking to all of them. But when we had our meeting as a group, they were quite clear that they had heard about the $1 billion, which was good, which means that our advocacy was working. And that was my point, is to make sure that you understand that when we send out things that say, please sign up on this action alert, we're not doing it just because we want to look busy. We're doing it because we feel like it's going to be effective advocacy. So if you receive these, and you can sign up for action alerts from our organization, CAM, and others, do sign those, because my point was that it made a difference. They heard from us because that they were like, oh, it's not just 6 people who think this is important. There's over 4,000 constituents right now who think this is important. So, okay, there's a specific question about how can we help on an SFOG denied grant. I think it would probably be best to either reach out to Neva California. Casey, is that something you guys help with?
I know the district offices of SBA do have some great resources. I would suggest reaching out to them. If you're a member of Neva National, they do send almost daily, if not more, updates around SVOG and kind of FAQ. There is an email address, implementation@nevasoc.org for questions. But I think that those are kind of the best resources. And I did put the Neva California Gmail accounts in the chat as well, but we'll do our best to kind of point you in the right direction.
And to put a finer point on just some of the broader themes of a couple questions we're seeing, just because you were denied for SVOG does not necessarily mean you will be denied for the California Grants Program. So I want to emphasize that, again, that we are very much in the infancy of creating this program. The language is set now. It's a matter of interpreting it and implementing it. So I want to emphasize for the folks that who do promote live events and yet were denied SVOG, you know, we're focused, we're listening, we're hearing you, and we're focused on making sure this is a lot smoother, but I want you to know that your voice is being heard on that.
Excellent. Is Jason Schmelzer, I can never say your last name, part of CAC? Is he a lawyer? He is not a lawyer. He's a lobbyist. And he's
looks like a lawyer. He looks like a lawyer, though. Very studious.
Is a lobbyist for California Arts Advocates and many other organizations, but he's our lobbyist. So I don't think we're going to get to all the questions here because we only have about 3 minutes left. We will save the Q&A. I will submit it to the rest of the team here. And we will also, you know, see some similar themes, which will help us in terms of understanding some of the issues. I also think clearly we're going to do another one of these webinars once the grants are actually, you know, the programs are starting to roll out. So everyone is aware and we can go over that with you as well. So think of us as your resource. That is why we are here for you. And I just thought I'd give everyone a chance to, if there's anything else you want to add, any parting comments before we close out today. And just, yeah, Jennifer.
Yeah, I just don't want to miss the opportunity to remind folks that a fair amount of funds are also still probably in the hands of cities and counties, that they have some flexibility around relief grant programs or other local. So please don't don't miss opportunities to check in with your city councilman or our city council person, or your county supervisor or your mayor's office, and see what's brewing at the local level to make sure that arts organizations are also part of the mix of funding that is at the discretion of local governments. A lot of them got some of the federal ARP, the American Rescue Plan money. It went direct to particularly the larger cities and counties, and they have all the discretion to decide how they're allocating those. And we've seen some already, Long Beach and others that were specific already, and where their mayors jumped out and were sure that funding was going to go to local government. But we have a very hard time. We basically can't be everywhere all the time. So please pay attention to what's going on at your city and county level too.
Yeah, I want to underscore that as well. Thanks, Jennifer. We actually have some decks on our website that talk about how to make the pitch for ARP funds in your local community. We have a letter that you can utilize as a template that is from California Arts Advocates, suggesting that your Board of Supervisors put funds to local arts and culture. So there's a lot of resources but as Jennifer said, we're all pretty small. We're small but mighty, but we can't be in 58 counties in a state of 40 million, but we will be there to help you as much as possible. Also, I would just put out a plug that you have a lot of regional arts advocacy organizations across the state. Los Angeles has Arts for LA, San Jose has San Jose Arts Advocates, Sacramento has SARA, San Diego Regional Cultural Coalition, San Francisco Arts Alliance. You have the Neva versions of these as well. So look for those regionally to ask some specific support questions. And then finally, always contact your local city council, board of supervisors, your state assembly and state senators, and and your congressional reps as well, and let them know that you exist, what you provide in your community, and invite them, thank them when they do good things, and continue to follow up all of us, and we'll continue to do good work with you, not for you. So thanks everyone for being here today. Thanks to our awesome panel. It's great to see all of you again. I can't wait till we can actually be in person doing all of this, and I'll have to start buying real shoes again. All right, everybody, have a great rest of the day and stay tuned for more information. Thanks so much.
Thank you.